All right, you admirable, you damnable, accursed. Herle here, and with me, the political panel. Here to dollop generous helpings of cuss into an insightful goulash of discuss. Scott Reid, Jordan Leichnitz, and fresh from Vegas, Kory Teneycke. Yeah. Here's the rundown for today. Newsy weekend for the carbon tax. The price of carbon increased, and Minister Guilbeault admitted the tax and rebate system is not revenue neutral to households, so we'll talk about the politics of that. The multi-billion-dollar Rogers-Shaw merger was approved with 21 legally enforceable conditions. The government is hoping, praying, will play politically. We'll dive into that a little bit. Our cursed clipping is Mike Crawley's CBC piece on Ontario's chief electoral officer calling for a public polling ban in the final 2 weeks of election campaigns. And then, of course, it's Mr. Pinsent calling for our Hey Yous. Jordan, Kory, Scott, did you have a good weekend? Kory, obviously you did.
Oh, well, depends your definition of good. Yeah, did I have a fun weekend? Yeah, I had a fun weekend. I've probably lost, 8 points off my IQ, hopefully not permanently. But it was, I'm still recovering.
Kory, Thursday night, you and I drank until 2 a.m, and then you left for Vegas the next morning.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Well, I left, the plane took off at 6, so I had to be there at 4 to pre-clear customs, which is a sign that U.S. Border Customs is not, up to full snuff that they let me through and into their country in that state. But anyway, I made it, and I made it back, so all is well.
Did you see Pete Rose?
No, although I may have, and I would not have recognized him.
I've been to Vegas many, many times. I've literally never not seen Pete Rose when I've been in Vegas. One night, Feschuk and I had dinner next to him, and it was one of the most depressing things I'd ever seen in my life. He sat at a table punching on his phone, clearly on some betting app, while he was about 11 feet from the casino floor, while his wife, who let's say is somewhere between 30 and 75 years younger than him, just kept reaching over, and he would pull out a wad of cash and give her bills, and then she would go off and gamble it. Then she would come back, ask for more money. They made no eye contact during any of these transactions. I didn't feel a great deal of physical or spiritual love between them, and it just was like, wow, don't meet your heroes, because that was gruesome.
Don't meet your heroes in Vegas, most specifically.
Pete Rose was your hero?
Jeez. I loved Pete Rose when I was a kid, Charlie Hustle. I liked the way, and
you liked Bill Cosby when you were a kid.
Yeah, it turns out that's less true. That's less true, to be fair.
Well, friends.
But he is.
I imagine
Pete Rose, a reprehensible creature.
I could see you in one of those red leather jackets that Michael Jackson wore with all the zippers in the 80s. Do you have one of those too? Or
goddamn right, you bet.
Yeah. All right. Let's fire up the machine here. Late breaking news that over the weekend, the climate change minister, Steven Guilbeault, confirmed what the parliamentary budget officer said last week. The carbon tax is not revenue neutral. Now, I'm not sure how many people ever believed it was revenue neutral out there in the Canadian population, because, to be honest, people don't tend to believe that government sets up a tax from which it makes no money and distributes back to you all the money that it took in. I've found in the past that people have trouble believing that to be true. So I don't know if people ever believed this was revenue neutral. But more interesting to me about this is that the Parliamentary Budget Office calculation was that what made it not revenue neutral is the drag it is on the economy and therefore on incomes. And so it's not that they're not giving back to you what you paid in. It's that you'd have made more money if the carbon tax hadn't existed. I've never heard that articulated before. I mean, it makes sense, but I've never heard that articulated before, that the carbon tax is a drag on economic growth in Canada. So, Jordan, I've always thought this was a politically vulnerable point for the government as the carbon tax was going to increase. At the beginning, it was so low, nobody noticed or cared. But as it starts to bite, as it has to be effective, I always thought it was going to be a point of vulnerability, because people don't want to pay taxes and they don't really want to pay to stop climate change either. So is this latest development a thing?
So is it a thing? I think what's a thing here more than almost anything else is the one-dimensional nature of the Liberal climate plan, the poor communications of the minister on it, and really just a lack of ability to respond to people's real life affordability concerns while doing climate policy. And I want to nuance just a little bit what you said about the PBO report, because of course, the other thing the PBO didn't measure is the cost of not doing anything on climate change. So I just want to like put that on the table as baseline there. But I'm not going to defend Guilbeault's communication on this because I think it's atrocious. I think also this is a great example of how the PBO can throw some really interesting political wrenches, and that one should always be very, very careful what they ask the PBO because you might not like the answer. And I think just to stay on Guilbeault for a second, he's always been a really not a great choice for this portfolio. And this is, I think, a case of be careful what you wish for. As somebody who... Oh.
You're an environmentalist, I presume.
Yes.
Why isn't he your dream choice?
He's not my dream choice because I think that he has a hard time getting out of really what is an incredibly detailed and technocratic climate plan that is focused far too much on a carbon price and not nearly enough on employment, good jobs, affordability, and other things like that, which we've talked a little bit about, linked to the IRA. But he is so deep in the climate policy that he's really lost the ability to communicate about it to ordinary people. And the problem, I think, in general with the Liberal approach on climate is that it leans very heavily on talking about the doom that is climate change. And I want to be really clear, it's going to be bad. I hope my kids have lots of skills and can be like the charismatic leaders of a small band of climate survivors, because that is likely their future. But it's not a compelling way to communicate with people about this. And then when the solution that's presented is one that's so complex, like the idea that we're going to take money from you every day when you fill up your gas tank and we're going to give it back to you in some sort of a complicated formula, this absolutely lends itself to being mischaracterized and to not being believed by people. So the Liberals, I think, have painted themselves into their corner because they've focused so heavily on the carbon price as the overall solution on the climate file. And then they've saddled themselves with a minister who really has lost or has no ability anymore to communicate this with ordinary people. And it's not a passion play, right? Climate action can't be a passion play, but too often for the Liberals, that's what it is. And this leaves open just a massive vulnerability on the side of Pierre Poilievre. Now, I think that putting this change in perspective, for most people, this is going to be $1 more every time they fill up. So I don't want to overstate it, but that's not nothing, right? And when you look at what has been successful in the US, one of the things that's been really successful in the Inflation Reduction Act is the pairing of the affordability measures with the climate measures. For example, Biden has leaned really heavily into energy efficiency retrofits to help people save money as the cost of energy goes up. That kind of coupling is completely missing in the policy response from the Liberals at any kind of a scale that would make a difference to people. And so my frustration with this is that their political choices have left the climate plan that Canada does have completely vulnerable to attacks from the right.
Scott, I've been a Chicken Little about this carbon tax from the very beginning. Give me a reality check. It's all fine, right?
Oh, yeah. In fact, it's cleverly working for the government, and it will make you better, David. And that's the important thing, is that you need to be better. I think that climate change is, it's a broad, goofy, indefensible, and ultimately unprovable statement. So it's kind of my favorite sort of statement. But I think that climate change is becoming for Justin Trudeau what constitutional politics was for Pierre Trudeau, right? It gradually, over the course of time, it's the definitional element of his time as prime minister. It's becoming the thing that he is about, but he doesn't have a René Lévesque. There's no, you know what I mean? There's no climate change villain. You can say, oh, Pierre Poilievre is going to be against the carbon tax and all that. Well, that's not the villain he needs. He needs a villain that is unsympathetic to voters, that allows him to look like a champion. And so, I think there's a grave risk and trending towards certainty that a definitional fight in the next election is going to be carbon tax. And obviously that's what the Conservatives have signaled they want. I increasingly fear that's what the Liberals think they want. And I worry about that. I think, first, people don't want to pay taxes, as you've sort of mentioned, David, you've noted. Second, Biden, as you've said, and you've made this point repeatedly also, David, Biden demonstrates that it's possible to place in the public domain what is seen to be as a credible climate plan that does not include a carbon tax. So that doesn't have to. So, now you may privately believe that it's still, as a government, you may privately believe that it's the measuring stick as to whether or not you're serious and so on and so forth. But politically, it's very difficult to say, well, if you oppose the carbon tax, you oppose climate action, because the Biden example can get thrown in your face. And finally, I do worry about Guilbeault as the messenger for this. Among many other things, isn't it bizarre? I love Vashi, but isn't it bizarre that Guilbeault decides that he's going to reverse years of government messaging around what this thing is based on, just in a Q&A?
But it was
on
incompetence,
Sunday?
not intention.
But yes, exactly. Bingo, ding, 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 Kanye, right? And so,
wake up and say, today's the day, friend.
That's my point. That's my point. If the government is going to say something as fundamental on an issue that is as central to its program and to its electoral prospects as this, and it's going to reverse years of its sort of fundamental messaging on it, don't you think you want to do it in a structured fashion? Isn't it kind of like Paul's press conference, around, we're going to have to admit that we can't do the GST and we can't abolish it. It had to be that kind of moment where you're going to say, here's what you do. This is how it does. It just kind of throw it off. I mean, he almost said what we say, which is, fuck, who the fuck can believe that in the first place? Come on, doesn't make any sense. Obviously, and, a little bit of, so, I worry about all those things. And I do think it's a huge vulnerability. Last thing, I'm not a climate policy expert by any imagination, but I worry about the tone deafness on this set of issues and the implied value judgment that's there, which is listen, if you're going to bitch and moan about this, then you're a fucking bad person and you don't get it. And you're not concerned about this most consequential, fundamental, generational challenge that we face. And I just don't know that you can take that posture on this. And the final thing is isn't there something incoherent about neutrality? I know people talk about BC, but fundamentally, if a carbon tax's purpose is to alter behavior, doesn't it need to be so high and cost me so much that it forces behavioral change? And if all of that is cushioned, then I'm not going to change my behavior. And, and if you're saying, well, no, there's a whole series of other sort of, benefits in terms of the way that it shifts for incentives, well, then you can do that through a trading system. And I prefer to do it that way. I think they should have chosen that path years ago. I think that Ontario under Bevan, had a better program put together with knitting together with Quebec and California. But at least politically, it seemed a lot more
party
scalable.
had suggested a wide-ranging cap and trade system.
Yeah.
Corey, you've been sitting patiently. You must have no views on this subject.
Yeah, none at all. Well, let's take apart some of the rationality of the carbon tax argument, just around incenting changes in behavior. The reality is, even if you were wanting to play along with that and say, all right, I can't afford life with this carbon tax. I've got to change the way I commute. I'm going to take public transportation right now. Okay, in a lot of cities, in a lot of communities, a lot of places, there isn't an
Regina.
option.
Show me your Regina. Show me your subway, Regina.
Well, even in Toronto, we're only now
getting dangerously close to scatological jokes there, David. Knock it off.
Well, we are in I'm in downtown Toronto right now, and we are building the Ontario line. We're just starting. The first shovels are just starting to go into the ground now. It's going to be years before it's completed. That's a subway system that should have been built in the 80s. We have there is not the transportation infrastructure. If people were to magically change their behavior and wanted to play along with that, it's not there to allow them to do so in a way that makes any sense for them if it's viable at all. If you want to talk about EVs, You know, if you're the third person on your block that buys an EV, if you could even find one, and
you're going to
afford
shut down
ones,
everybody's lights. You're going to shut down everybody's lights on the street.
You're going to crash the grid. So, like, you know, you got to have if you're going to say we're going to try to funnel people into different choices here, there have to be viable alternatives that are in place to allow them to do it. And you know, the reality is we've got people trapped where they have to pay more. They don't have a viable alternative. If you're in a rural area, you know, a EV under current technology is probably not going to work for you at all. So you know, the whole notion is fatally flawed from the get-go. And I think as we've talked about many times, there's an alternative approach to this that's being used not just in the US, but in many other countries that is not this. And it's increasingly becoming something that people are aware of, that there is more than one way to skin this cat. You know, more people are watching news that comes from outside of Canada's borders than generated inside. They can't have this sort of North Korea-like argument where the fact of a carbon tax is the only way to address climate change is a viable argument in isolation in our media market, and no one's ever going to see the reality of other places. So, like, I think there's just a fundamental problem with the whole thing. That said, I agree with all of the comments that Jordan made around Guilbeault, and I'll go even further and talk about it a little more in my Hey You. But this guy is a single issue zealot, and single issue zealots, I don't care which issue it is, make poor ministers. They make poor members of a cabinet and a government because they are not thinking about problems in a holistic sense. How it affects other parts of the government and the economy and society. They're only focused on this one narrow band to the exclusion of everything else. In Guilbeault's interview with Vashi, he talks about this. He's like, well, it doesn't matter that, you know, everybody hates me. I only have to, you know, get along with other parts of my government. I just have to focus on this one area and fuck them on everything else. And that's like a terrible, terrible way to approach any issue, any portfolio. And it makes you, I think, incompatible with being a functional minister in government. There isn't as many stories about this guy being a fucking prick to deal with inside the Liberal cabinet and caucus as there are of him being a fucking prick to deal with outside of the government with provinces. This guy can't get along with anyone. I understand he threatens to quit every other day. Somebody tries to do that once, you show him the door. Maybe if you're very generous, you'll wait for the second time before you kick him the fuck out. But, you know, those are universal grounds for get out of cabinet. And this guy has been there playing these games for way, way too long. Time to go.
One other thing
Can I say something, Jordan? Because I don't disagree with anything anybody's saying here, but I do think there's something new. Like the whole business about the political precariousness of the carbon tax as we understood it, I already agreed with. I learned something fundamental when we were dealing with the deficit in the 1990s, and that is that Paul wasn't the first finance minister who had tried to persuade people that we needed restraint. Previous finance ministers had also tried that. What was different was the circumstance that the country was in, the recession that the country was in, and that people for the first time saw a relationship between the federal deficit and their own economic circumstances. That was the condition in which they cared. They saw the crisis right fucking there. And those are the circumstances in which people are prepared to make sacrifices when they see it right fucking there. So I always knew that this was never going to work in a climate thing because by the time you see it, it's too late. And in advance, people aren't going to pay and sacrifice, which is why Biden is right to be pursuing a no sacrifice policy as opposed to our sacrifice-based policy. However, I think
sacrifice without outcome, though, because it only makes sense as a policy if you can actually have people change their behavior and do these other things, which
I understand.
I agree. Talked about is not possible.
But I just think that this PBO report and Guilbeault's admission of it is another big hole through the hull because it's a different argument. The argument is that this carbon tax is a drag on our economy and we have slower growth and lower incomes than we would have. Nobody has said that. Not even Poilievre has said that. Well, and certainly the Liberals have never said, by the way, this is a consequence.
And this is a failure of their communications also, for example, around the budget. So if you're bringing out your green investments, your clean tech investments to confront the IRA, where are your jobs estimates for that? Where are your projections about employment and economic growth that are going to come from that you're spinning out as a story? When it really comes down to it, one of the huge mistakes I think that the Liberals made in their political choices around how to message climate, and they made this mistake a very long time ago and have sort of stuck with it, is the idea that we can consumer choice our way out of the climate crisis. And it's just not a fact. What is driving the vast majority of emissions in Canada is industrial work. That is what is driving it. But the onus has somehow become on individuals, on people filling their tanks, on people who have, as Kory really articulated very well, who have no choice but to drive. Like if you live in Northern Ontario, good luck getting anywhere other than in your gas vehicle. And a new car is not in the family budget every 5 years for these folks. So the Liberals really, I think, they forked in the road and they chose to emphasize the consumer responsibility component of climate action. And it's just deadly because it's not borne out in facts, and they haven't buttressed the policy underneath. They haven't made the big shifts in terms of the social safety net and the kinds of public services that we would need for people actually to do those things.
Can I just add quickly, David, just on your point, because you're so struck by the PBO's analysis that it's a drag on economic growth, and I can hear you saying like that adds a dimension of vulnerability that you hadn't previously calculated, and you think it's really undermining. I would just say, my guess is that is from an economic standpoint the most vulnerable part of that analysis, because I think that it's probably most reliant on a wide set of variables as opposed to just like a common sense straightforward calculation, not a common sense, but a straightforward calculation. And secondly, I'm not sure, to be fair to Guilbeault, which I know Kory's inclined to be, that's what he acknowledged on air. I think he was just acknowledging that there will be, it won't be neutral. I don't think that he was necessarily acknowledging and conceding that particular talking point, but nevertheless, so unless it's contested, then it becomes a truism. And even if it is contested, it probably becomes a truism. I think in a weird way, all this puts a huge onus on Poilievre, because there's like a flashing arrow saying, here there be votes, here there be massive votes, and you know your opponent won't back down, alter, or adjust. So you know, whenever you can get in politics, whenever you can get your opponent into a position where you know that if you can make this an argument, they will take a side that is damaging to them. Like that's gold. And for Poilievre to get there, he has to put together enough of a plan that allows him to concentrate on the carbon tax. He can't allow it to be climate, no climate, right? So as long as he can put together, and he doesn't have to do it today, but as long as he can put together prior to the next election, something that seems to hang together, and we'll see if he can.
Look, I fundamentally disagree with him having to draw up some detailed plan that can be, sniped at and nitpicked at. I think you just have to make the larger point, as has been made here, that there are other countries that are pursuing a different approach on this, which are widely viewed by experts and even this government as credible in terms of their climate plans, and saying, you know what, we're not going to do what this government is doing and has seemed to have, just absolutely closed its eyes and ears on doing it any other way, and point to, Joe Biden, and point to other countries where there's a different approach being taken that is working, that is getting results, and that is not this. I agree with David's point about people have to see pain and cause before they're going to make a sacrifice. I think they're seeing lots of pain and cause in terms of what's happening to their own personal budget as a result of a carbon tax, and the sacrifice they're going to make is this government if they're not careful, because I think it will come to that. We're still going to see big pressures on cost of living due to inflation. This government has taken an approach on mitigation being really only for the very lowest income brackets. There's a vast swath of the middle class that are being left out when it comes to any sort of assistance with this. And the carbon tax is making it worse. And so, we can't change global inflation, but we can change the government in a carbon tax. And I think what's being set up right now is a really good case for doing so.
So are we all agreed? Are we all agreed that the vulnerability on climate is shifting from the Conservatives, where it has been for the last several elections, to the Liberals?
I've
Yeah,
always
sure.
thought it's so.
I think
definitely
they're
felt that.
both vulnerable. I think they're both vulnerable in different ways, and I think it's going to axe on how the Liberals choose to use the climate issue during the campaign, and whether they want to pick that as a culture war, which I think would be a disastrous decision. But if that's what they choose to do, then we'll see how that plays out. Look, I'm going to disagree a little bit with Kory. Like, I do think that people are already seeing the impacts of climate change. I mean, just ask people in BC who are now regularly needing to flee their communities because of forest fires or flooding or landslides. Like, it's here, right? And I do think that people recognize that. But what's missing is an approach that pairs climate action with affordability, with good jobs, with the future that people actually feel hopeful about rather than frightened of. And I do think that there's an opportunity for New Democrats here if they're able to be nimble to kind of seize that space, because the Liberals have completely walked away from it. So we'll have to see if they can capitalize on that.
Well, maybe you'd see that direct impact if you're living in like Hope, British Columbia. Although I imagine if we actually polled in Hope, British Columbia, we'd find that carbon tax is very unpopular. But let's just take that as a given. You're not seeing this doom and gloom California forest fires and atmospheric rivers, et cetera, hitting Mississauga and Whitby and places like that where the election is going to be decided. There you just get a big fucking bill every time you go to the gas station or the grocery store, and you're not very happy about it. So it requires you to make these very oblique links between hurricanes and tornadoes and atmospheric rivers and what you're experiencing in suburban Toronto. The link isn't there in front of mind for everyone. So I think like that creates a real challenge. It's, and if we want to take a much broader view of things, let's be honest, Canada's contribution to climate change is infinitesimally small. The biggest things that we could do as a country is export natural gas to displace coal in places like China and South Korea and other places. And this government won't even allow us to do that. Like, if Canada wanted to actually be making a large contribution to climate, addressing climate change, that's the number one thing that we could do that would help the world. And we can't do that under this government. They won't allow it to happen. They want to have you change your commute in an impossible way and pay a big tax in the process.
I just think that Biden has given Poilievre the template of what the policy is. Just take the Biden policy, roughly, it even includes fucking drilling, right?
It includes more drilling.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So
it's let's call it what
take
it
the
is.
Biden policy and dare Trudeau to call it shitty.
It's the Brad Wall approach. Largely, it's more Biden's approach is more the Brad Wall approach than it is the Justin Trudeau approach.
But I think it's important to recognize that the environmental movement in the U.S. has become a great deal more pragmatic in the last 5 to 10 years. In order to get to where they got to with the IRA, there was a sea change in how they lobbied, in what their demands were, in what their goals were, and like they were able to pull out a pretty big win because of that. We don't have that same ecosystem here in Canada, and so I think part of the issue is that the Liberals are really listening. They see it as a tension between environment and jobs, and they haven't been able to reconcile that in their own thinking on the issue, in their choice of minister on the issue, and in the policies that they've put forward.
I actually hear that a big part of it's been the person who was the key advisor on climate in the Prime Minister's office, who I think has just recently left, but who was a very ideological person about this. That was where the blockage of nuclear came from in the story, and that's where the disinterest in jobs, I think, came from. In this story. Scott, did you have something you wanted to wrap up?
I just wanted to your core question about, whether this has shifted as a vulnerability for the Conservatives to the Liberals. I think that's indisputable. To the point, actually, just to like really telescope in on it, I think to the point where if climate is if it's one of the top two issues, and if it's a consequential issue in the next election, it probably means the Liberals aren't winning, because I don't see any dynamic where that is a driving force in the election, where it isn't about the carbon tax. And as a consequence, the Liberals will be driven into a culture war argument. And I do think it will become a law of diminishing returns and reinforce a bunch of bad habits and positioning. I do think, and so then you say, well, what do you do? Well, you got to make the election about something else. You got to have a different kind of, if you want people to not pay attention to a queen, you got to play a king or an ace. And I don't know exactly what that is, but around this issue set, one of the things I think they've got to start to think about is assuming that Poilievre's going to ape in many ways the Biden plan because it's so obvious that even we can fucking see it. So if that's what's going to happen, then I think you've got to build your argument not around, well, then they don't get it and they're going to hurt our children are going to have to grow gills kind of argument. You're going to have to make an argument about economic loss. You're going to have to find a way to say, right, nuclear, hydrogen, renewable energy, all these jobs, this repatriation of all these manufacturing sectors, that's all going to be lost because their plan is going to create instability, uncertainty. That's going to drive away investment. That means that, that good union job that gets you 42.4 hours a week is going to be lost. Like they have to take it into that zone. And as you've said, all of us have said, frankly, so many times, that is just not the road these guys drive down, right? But they've got to turn it into an economic argument.
Yeah, I mean, it's very hard for them to move it off of being a moral issue, and this is a real challenge for them.
Well, they feel that way about it. Well, they feel that way about it.
That's the problem.
Do you think Guilbeault wants nuclear? I don't think so. Do you think wants? Do you think he wants to have more mining of critical minerals? Of course he doesn't. Like he barely approved one project in Quebec with like 500 conditions on it. And he made it pretty clear on question period this week that he has no intention of even looking at the Ring of Fire. He switched from his "I'm only the environment minister" to "I'm the Aboriginal Affairs minister," mid-sentence to justify his decision not to actually engage on the file. And guess what? None of those battery plants are going to be fucking built if there's no Ring of Fire. Not in Southwestern Ontario.
But it's your point about single issue true believer ministers, right? It's dangerous. Like if you made me the federal minister of Bob Dylan, right, I would be on TV saying that people can't listen to the Beatles or the Stones. And that would be like, people would be like, well, fuck, I want to listen to the Beatles and the Stones.
Mistakes were made.
Can I just interrupt to tell you that this album behind me over my right shoulder.
Oh, yeah. The Red album.
The Red album, Beatles 62 to 66. This is the 50th anniversary of this and the Blue accompanying album being released. I'm telling you, all you kids listening to this show, right? I don't care what's in your music collection. If you don't have this and you get it, it's going to be the best record in your collection immediately.
We're so old. We're so old, Herle.
But it's okay because David's also wearing a Lana Del Rey t-shirt.
I've always had a particular anxiety around endings. I don't like them. A lifetime in politics will do that to you, but maybe the die was cast on November 28th, 1976. 64th Grey Cup game, and my beloved Riders, on a loose spiral from Tommy Clements to Tony Gabriel, lose to Ottawa with 31 seconds left in the game. Ted Provost bites on Gabriel's fake, and a 14-year-old Herle, along with the rest of Saskatchewan, gets crushed. But here's an ending I need to be on my game for. We've been talking for 10 weeks about a single subject because it's that important to our presenting sponsor, TELUS. Network resilience and reliability. It's embedded at the core of their culture because, let's face it, it's existential to TELUS. I mean, without that, what have you got, eh? This is the final installment of that story. I've talked about how they invest billions of dollars to build differently, more reliably than many of their competitors. And I've talked about how TELUS team members respond as human beings, going above and beyond to keep other humans connected in the face of windstorms, atmospheric rivers, COVID, and all manner of natural disasters. But it seems to me this is the crux of it. The ability to connect is far more than the wires and wireless hubs, the download speeds, cell sites, and other technologies. There's an us at the end of TELUS, and that's what it's about for them. The way we can give our support to loved ones when they need it the most. How we can better access our own medical care and information. The way we learn and teach and take advantage of an expanded world of educational opportunity. How small business in our remote communities can reach new markets and customers. Herle Burleyites, when it comes to resilience and reliability, you can think about the connection. And you can think beyond the connection to what's at the heart of it. TELUS does. That's something that's not going to end. All right, our clipping this week comes to us from CBC Queen's Park, and it's another opportunity to remind people what a great reporter Mike Crawley is. This week, He has the Ontario electoral officer recommending a ban on public opinion polls in the last 2 weeks of an election, or at least of them being published, not of them being done, but of them being published in the last 2 weeks of an election. Political polls have the potential to influence election results, says the report of the Chief Electoral Officer. The Chief Electoral Officer recommends that no public opinion polling results stating political party favorability ratings be published in the final 2 weeks before Election Day. Many survey respondents lost interest in the election due to early reports of one-sided results, says the report. It says 36 polls were published in the 2 weeks leading up to voting day on June 2nd of last year. I have to declare a conflict. I'm a pollster. Kory, is this a reasonable proposal?
It's one of the stupidest fucking ideas I've heard in a long time. I'm entering it on my personal computer under interesting comments and advice and filing it under dumb fucking ideas that'll never happen. Yeah, it's ridiculous. Like, of
course it is.
You know, so the fact that the polls said Party X was going to win consistently, and then Party X won, is not driven by the fact that the polls said that. It's why people were voting, you know, and voter turnout is, you know, as we've discussed before, is largely driven by you know, whether or not you think it's a change election. And, you know, if you really want to change the government, or if you think it's a really close race, you'll tend to see voter turnout go up. If a government is going to get reelected handily, you tend to see voter turnout go down. These are not new things. The fact that the Elections Commissioner Ontario doesn't understand elections and politics very well, sounds like it should be surprising, but it's not terribly surprising. But you know what? Who fucking cares what this guy has to say or thinks? In my view, thanks for the advice. Never going to fucking happen. See you later. Next topic. Like, who's going to do this? No one is going to do this.
Jordan, is there an upside to this idea?
No, I think it's also, in fact, I actually think it's a really dangerous idea. And the reason why I say that is because if we cast our minds forward and imagine a world in which this was done, what's just going to happen is that you're going to leave elections open and vulnerable to huge amounts of mis and disinformation, to polls coming from outside Ontario, to like the rumor mill. And there's all kinds of things that influence turnout in elections. And I think that it's really false to just focus on polls as being the one sort of negative effect. I mean, I would certainly make the argument that if you really want to talk about what disincentivizes people from voting, our electoral system is a piece, that is missing in this conversation, right? So polls to me don't seem really any worse than opinion columns or newspaper endorsements or any of those other things. People are always going to seek outside information about what's happening in a race, and if we remove polls that have some level of transparency to them, then that's just going to become a lot more toxic, particularly in the environment.
Why aren't people entitled to know? Why aren't people entitled to know what's going on?
Can I jump back in, because I'll give a more substantive rationale building on what Jordan just said. We have the internet. There's going to be people who are going to be putting out rumors or things about, there's a super secret poll we're not allowed to report, but here's, what the top line numbers are, and it can all be bullshit, and there's no recourse on any of that. What is good about our system is that, you have polling that has to be done in a certain way to be compliant with CRTC regulations, other things. You have to attribute who the pollster is. Those data tables get released so that other pollsters can look at them and critique the poll. Oh, well, you upsampled this demographic in a massive way, and this poll is
You
vulnerable.
only talked to 3 people under the age of 35 years old.
And here's your question, and you totally put your finger on the scale in the order of your questions, or this is actually a push poll, not a real poll. Transparency in polling and what actually comes out is what we have now. That's really healthy and good. The idea of going to this clandestine world where it's rumors and nobody can actually look at anything is way worse. Like, it's just way worse. But this guy doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. So whatever. Like, it's not going to happen.
Scott, do you care enough to weigh in?
Yeah, I think this is an outstanding idea. I think its time has come. I think, in fact, it fails to go far enough. There's a whole roster of things that if we want to have a good, clean election, we need to get rid of. And that includes ads. and lawn signs and talk between neighbors and strangers in bars, sex, because I don't know about you guys, but lust is almost always accompanied by talk of politics for me. And so I just think we got to get rid of it all. We got to drum it out of the process so that people are just making cerebral choices based solely on what they see in front of them. Like I obviously agree with you guys completely. I think it's inane. It's anyway. You guys have articulated a whole host of things. I will say one small thing, which is I would love to see a greater obligation to have greater disclosure. And I know this is a waste of time and won't influence anything. It would just make me feel better. Greater disclosure and description and characterization about the methodology behind the polls, and I'd like some kind of rough characterization of the reliability of competing methodologies, because I think, we've moved into a world where, the
aggregators in the States give them ratings, right? So that you can know what the record of an individual pollster is.
Because you get one weird poll, and it's like, hey, holy shit, is this happening? And
it's fair to
it's bullshit.
The accuracy of the industry, and that's healthy. But banning it outright.
It's just, it's fucking dumb. It's like, we should also go by time zones, in terms of, the release of election results. I mean, we did that. Like, I can remember in 1997 waiting around saying, oh my God, we're getting killed in Atlantic Canada. But, most people didn't know that. Like, it's just, it's all ridiculous. It's anachronistic, the thought.
Speaking of turnouts, though, do you think we should move to mail-in ballots like the States is moving to mail-in ballots? Like, that is just taking over U.S. elections now as the way that most people vote in a lot of jurisdictions. Seems reasonable.
I think it's absolutely worth experimenting with, and I think it could do some really interesting things to get out the vote operations. Obviously, then you move from it being just an advance and E-Day thing to a much more rolling get out the vote operation. I think that it could change also pretty significantly who votes when we look at the people who may not make it to a polling station because of work commitments or childcare commitments. This opens that up for them. So I think it would be something absolutely worth dabbling in.
Well, I think there are problems with it. Like, there are opportunities in it, but there are problems with it. But the biggest thing is it has to really be figured out in a way that can't be gamed, where your identity is absolutely assured, that it's not, somebody going around and collecting ballots and then, doing it for them. Anything that's like that gets that then causes space in our politics for election denialism, which is the thing that I worry about the most, looking at what's happening in the States, we should be very hesitant on. There's another alternative to getting more people out to vote, which I think is a much better incremental step, and we're doing a lot more of it, is having more days where you can vote, have way more advanced poll dates. I would even go so far as saying, like, the last 20 days or something, or half the campaign, you should be able to go and vote if you want to, and have a system with a reasonable number of polling locations that you can go and do that, extending voting hours so that people who are working or single parents or something with more issues around childcare, where that is an easier process for them, but where you still have a real person giving you a ballot and there's a verification and a crossing off the voters list.
And we should never go away from paper ballots to machines.
I agree. It's for the same reason. It's not that there isn't a way to do it that is safe, but what is the big thing that we have to worry most about? It's not credibility. It's not lack of voter turnout. That is a problem. But if the fix to that leads to space for election denialism, I just say look south of the border and ask yourself if that isn't the greater evil here, if that isn't the greater risk to our system, because I believe it is. Like, I can tear your democracy in two.
It's fair to say as well that Elections Canada did experiment with a lot more mail-in votes in the last campaign, and they managed to do that in a way that I think protected election integrity and didn't leave space for those concerns. So there's something to build on there. But at the same time, you also have Elections Canada reducing the number of polling stations in a lot of communities. It's made voting less accessible. So I think as we consider and pursue some of these new ways of voting, you also can't lose sight of the fact that there needs to be, little old lady needs to be able to walk to the church down the street and vote. Like, we can't lose that level of accessibility, and particularly when you start to look at rural, remote, and Indigenous communities where this was a massive issue last campaign.
Well, you have to fund it. The government has to fund it. And elections are expensive, but what's really expensive is having elections that people don't believe are legitimate. So, I think there's a dual mandate. ensure
Hey,
that the
Scott
vote
has-
is fair and try to make it possible for people to get out in a reasonable manner.
Scott has a ground game comment. Let's give him some space here.
That's me. I got lots of thoughts.
Hello?
I'm muted. I was muted. It's everybody's fondest wish. No, I was going to go to a completely. I don't have a ground game comment.
I know you didn't. I was going to move on to a new topic.
I just want to say one quick thing. I'm going to tell you a funny story. About 2-3 elections ago, I go into this. I go into the voting station, right? And you've got the blue hair rinse set, all sitting around, as DROs or whatever they call them, little poll captains and stuff, right? And I go in, and this little old lady looks up at me, and she recognizes me from TV or something like that. She must obviously be a politically interested. Exactly, terribly introverted creature. And she says, she looks up at me, and she goes, "Oh, well, I guess we know how you're going to be voting. I guess you're going to be voting the right way, huh? Liberal." And she hands me my ballot. And the guy comes running over. The DRO is like, whoa, what's going on here, right? Just made me laugh. Like, I love the quaintness of going to vote in the old, school gym.
It totally warms my heart every time. Like, we always take the kids, and it's
for sure. Me too.
It's great.
Yeah.
Well, filling out something and putting it in the mail doesn't come with that experience.
That's
either.
right.
There's
It doesn't.
probably something to be said for that.
So, a thing happened in the pre-dawn hours of March 26th in Thunder Bay on the western shore of Lake Superior. A ship called the Harvest Spirit crossed the port city's breakwall at 5 o'clock in the morning and tied up at the Superior Grain elevator. As is customary, the ship's captain was awarded the new top hat that goes to the skipper of the first ship of the new year to dock in Thunder Bay. And with that, the furthest inland port on the vast Great Lakes system emerged from its winter hibernation and went back to business. Cargo began flowing once again through its grain terminals. The Great Lakes system, thousands of miles of rivers, locks, lakes, canals, and ports, is supremely vital to the economies of Eastern Canada and the United States. Thing is, the water is fresh, so it freezes. The last ships of the season tend to depart Thunder Bay in late December, after which everything ices up until late March. The Harvest Spirit, the first ship to return this year, took on more than 14,000 tons of canola Sunday and headed off that night bound for Windsor. There are several other major port cities on the lakes, of course, and ships carrying grain from Thunder Bay visit them all. Some keep going, heading up the St. Lawrence Seaway to Montreal, Quebec City, the Maritimes, and then Europe or Africa. Our sponsor, CN, has tracks leading directly from Western Canada to Thunder Bay, and the spring reopening signifies the return of blessed balance. Prairie grain farmers have been producing record crops in recent years, and the Great Lakes system is the perfect alternative to the Port of Vancouver, which, to put it bluntly, is overloaded. CN has been setting records too, moving grain east and west from the prairies. When our supply chains are fully open and all their participants are cooperating, it's a beautiful thing. And as we have all seen in recent years, utterly crucial. CN moves cargo, moves it on time, and moves it safely. Count on it. Okay, so our last topic today, I've got to declare obviously a conflict off the top because TELUS is the presenting sponsor of this show. Nonetheless, there was a pretty big economic and political development last week in Canada, and that is that one of the biggest corporate transactions in Canadian history closed last week. Rogers bought Shaw Communications and then sold the spectrum that enables Freedom Mobile to Videotron. Now, this deal was opposed by the Competition Bureau and pretty much every normal person you asked about it. I think personally that the approval at a minimum, that the government approving this at a minimum is an opportunity cost for them, because this was an opportunity for them to look more populist, to look more responsive to cost of living, to look more responsive to consumer interests and to the little guy, and to look a little bit more like they looked in 2015 than they look today. But whether or not approving it is a problem for them, I'm interested in what you folks think. Scott, is this going to be an issue?
I kind of doubt it. Maybe the NDP will take issue with it, but I don't think it's going to be an election changer. I don't think it's going to be a vote changer if we have a campaign in 2025. I'm with you, though, David. Like, I mean, I know you can make an honest argument that the list of conditions and the enforceability of those conditions seems to go further than anything we've ever seen in this space before. But you're not going to convince me. And that's somebody who's worked in the top, and I have a conflict too. I've also, but you're not going to convince me, even after all these years in government, all these years in public policy, all these years working, in that sector even, that this thing isn't going to screw people in the ground over time. I just don't fucking believe it's better. It's not going to be better. It's going to be worse over time. And so I think, the government failed to do something, and people love it when we talk about our greatest hits, David, and go back into the, hey, in the 1990s, like back, we're sitting around.
But
Teddy
the politics
Roosevelt.
of the bank mergers are exactly the same.
It's exactly the same. And what we did then is we established sets of processes with the facilitation of the department, not that they were participating in a hyper politicized process, but what they created processes that permitted reviews that would allow for an outcome either way. And I think they got themselves into a situation was just a question of at what price would they approve it, as opposed to would they approve it. And I think that was I think it's just indicative of the way this government operates, which is that it doesn't deal with issues when they're 3 steps away. It only deals with issues when they're right on top of it. And in this case, you couldn't deal with it that way, other than the outcome being inevitable.
Kory, you think there's any politics in this thing?
Yeah, well, just because we're all doing a conflict off. My firm does work for Bell, although I don't work on the file. Look, I think it's challenging. I like the bank analogy. I think there's something interesting and similar going on with how the Biden administration is having to respond to the SVB collapse, where you don't want to have things get too big, but you also want them to be of scale enough that the price is good and that there's stability. And even Rogers, they had some real stability issues in the past while with their system going down, and there being very big consequences for vendors trying to process payments, et cetera. So and people want to see a stable system, but they also want to see themselves as consumers paying something that's more akin to what people pay for these services in other countries. And I think the reality is that we pay a lot more in Canada. There's some good reasons for that in terms of geographic dispersion of the population, et cetera, but not to get into all of that. But yes, people would like to see more competition, yet that's also kind of cross-pressured by wanting to have it at scale. I'm not sure there was any way to avoid this, because this isn't, 2 healthy entities wanting to merge. This is Shaw saying, you know what, we're out. We're not going to do this. Like we're exiting the market. And so who's left to pick up the pieces? I don't know what, is the government going to step in and require Shaw not to get out of the business? To continue forward on something that is, not financially viable for them? I don't know. I think this is just sort of a steaming bowl of shit that they had to try to eat as carefully as they could. But there's no way this tastes good.
Jordan, let me lob this ball up in the air for you so that you can slam it out of the park. You're the government. You're identified as the state now. I mean, we all watched over the weekend Poilievre giving that speech about air travel and about who invents things and who does things in this world and all this kind of stuff. And the Liberals are increasingly seen as the representatives of the state, the representatives of the elite. You're walking down the street as the Minister of Industry, and you stumble across an issue like this, in which these entities want to merge. It's obviously massively in their financial interest to do so, and everybody from executives to shareholders is making a killing. All Canadians think their rates will go up as a consequence of this deal. Whether it's good for Canada or not, or for the system or not, is an arguable point. It's not a slam dunk. It's not obvious this needs to happen. So it's not like there's a compelling public policy reason to approve it. How do you walk past that opportunity to demonstrate your populist bona fides?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, as a New Democrat, I wouldn't, right? But this government clearly doesn't have the ability to even consider no as an answer for this. And I think that's my real beef with this, is that at no point in this process does it appear like the minister was ever seriously considering a no on this. And I think we have to be really precise. the system as it is completely fucked. Canadians pay some of the highest cell phone prices in the world. And yes, we have a large country, but so do places like Australia, and they don't pay anything close to the prices that we pay. And this deal, there's really no prospect that it's going to lower prices. And the government has to now go out and somehow suggest that less competition in the market is going to result in lower prices. Like, this is some upside down 1984, good is bad, crap. And Canadians aren't going to buy it. They have seen this. We've seen this movie in the past. And even the idea of conditions. This is a problematic way to approach this, because sure, you're going to attach conditions to the agreement. If somehow and it's not going to be this minister, but if some future minister sees that cell phone prices aren't coming down, okay, so what? You can't undo the merger. You're going to take them to court. You're going to levy penalties. Well, who's going to end up paying for those penalties? Consumers. This is all just going to get passed on down the line. And these companies also are receiving massive government subsidies in order to improve their infrastructure across the country. So I don't buy the idea that this merger was necessary to improve services. There's a lot of other ways to get to that endpoint. And really, like, we've seen this before. Like, you the bank merger example. I think about Nexon. In 2013, the Conservatives approved that takeover, and it had job guarantees in it. It was a 10-year job guarantee, and subsequently, Nexon shed thousands of jobs. And did anything happen to them? No, of course not. So really, the politics of this for the Liberals are garbage. I think that their mistake was from the very beginning not considering using this as a great example to say no, to stand up to what is really just this complete elite insider oligopoly, this handshake deal between, Rogers and Shaw that happened, this gentleman's agreement, they're going to split the country. Like, this is the bullshit that just makes people so angry when they're paying $200 a month for their cell phones. And so I do think it's a big opportunity for the New Democrats. Like, Singh has already been clear he's going to be out. He doesn't really care what the CRTC decision is on capping rates. They're going to talk about capping rates. And I think the politics of that are right.
Well, but this isn't a new problem, right? Like, there's multiple governments have tried to pursue more competition in the wireless space. Like, it was almost a singular obsession within that portfolio for the Harper government. You guys, Scott and David, tried to take steps in this direction, and stuff around consumer protections and taking your number from one carrier to another and getting rid of exploitive contracts. And there's lots of things that various governments have tried to do with this. But if you're looking at how would you bring rates down, well, you'd let in foreign competition. But here was always the fear and the discussions that at least I remember having when we were looking at this stuff. Well, then you probably don't have a Bell, you probably don't have a TELUS, you probably don't have a Shaw, and your wireless infrastructure and all that stuff. Those decisions are going to be made in places like Atlanta instead of Toronto. And these are, this is as fundamental, your telecom system is as fundamental to operating the Canadian economy as the rail system, as the highway system, like maybe more so in today's day and age. And do you really want to have no domestic players in it? And
well, I don't disagree with you, Kory, but I also don't think that's the full gamut of solutions, right? Like, you could also get the government much more involved in this.
All right, before we get down the track of policy,
yes.
I'm interested in Scott's take on the fact that, picking up on what Jordan said, the fact that the minister went right into the teeth of what Canadians believe about this. So if you were to poll Canadians, 95% of them will say, whatever else this deal does, it's going to increase my price. Right? May have other ancillary benefits, but it's going to increase my price. The minister goes right at it and says, this deal is designed to reduce prices. Is that going to work for him?
No. It's a direct consequence of the failure to establish a process from the outset that contemplated any answer other than yes, which left him politically feeling that his only alternative was to say that the approval of this deal was on the basis that it will have pleasing, welcoming public benefits, and that takes you to price. But it's something that is problematic because, one, people will not believe it, and you're never in a good place if your whole argument and message is based on something that people do not believe. And two, I don't believe it. I still don't believe it. You know what I mean? Fuck, come on. I don't believe it. I don't believe it will turn out to be true. I don't believe it is possible to turn out to be true.
And a carbon tax is revenue neutral.
Keep
the Liberals would just have to decide to break with with really powerful corporate interests here, and they just were not capable of thinking outside the box.
I think Kory makes a very sound argument when he makes a point that if you really want, like this idea, like successive governments talked about a fourth national carrier, it's also an element of this deal, a profound element of this deal, and a profound promise that this is going to be a consequence. It's all bullshit. And the only way to really get fundamental structural change is to bring in foreign competition, I believe. And the consequences of that are exactly as Kory outlined. So it is a fundamental policy conundrum, which just leaves you with kind of chicken hawk policy saying, by God, we're going to hold them to it. You just watch. And, that'll fade. Right. By the way, David, your mention of Pierre Poilievre's video, I don't know if everybody saw this video, but like, it is something worth watching. I've been fascinated by it. Like, I keep watching it. This sort of like, it's kind of got this, kind of evangelical temple sort of tone to it, like, give man wings and he shall fly. Give man a rib and he will create women. Like, it's just, there's something, I don't know. It's powerful and interesting, but it's deeply fucking creepy and weird also. There's just something strange. There's I don't know, man.
Do you just think he has a problem with connecting?
Well, he wasn't having trouble connecting with that group.
If you watch this, I don't know who's in the room, but they're in the palm of his fucking hand. It was a little this story about the Wright brothers and about this their competition. I didn't even know the story, by the way. So, by the way, just as an interesting tactic, part of the reason I watched the whole video is I was interested in the story. I didn't know the story.
Well, and I think that's part of it. He wants to display, and by the way, I think that's part of the weakness of it, is that there seems to be an underlying desire, and we've seen it occasionally in the past, for him to, I'm going to tell you some stuff about history you don't know because it interests me, and I think that, I'm going to show you how much I know. There's just a weird, but it really
with that guy at the party. This is not a guy we want to hang out with more.
It had revival.
Friend across the room saying, "Rescue me."
It really felt revival tent to me. Like there was a real messianic sort of like thing there, and I don't know, like it's weird, right down to the use of give man wings, and I don't know, man.
I just want to back up a little bit to what Jordan just said, because now this is explaining a lot for myself in terms of trapping people at parties and female reactions to my stories.
Around you and making funny
I go swaggering in.
I'm like, taking notes. I'm taking notes.
I go moving in on the old. I'm going to talk to you a little bit here. Let me freshen your drink when I come back. We're going to go over the Lord Bing affair.
I need to workshop this a little bit. Yeah, no, it's good.
All right, correct.
Only Gordon Pinson can save us now. Please, Gordon.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
All right, who's up with Hey You?
I can go.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I'd like to raise a glass today to Ruth and Terry Greer. So Ruth, Terry was a lifelong NDP organizer, was involved in the founding of the party, a professor and an MP who passed away earlier this month, and this week was his memorial service. And folks will also know Ruth Greer as an incredibly successful municipal provincial politician, member of the Reid cabinet, involved in a lot of really important legislation initiatives that still help people in Ontario today. So just wanted to extend condolences to Ruth and to all of those who worked with and appreciated Terry. And I think, this kind of lifelong partnership and commitment in politics is pretty rare to see. So I'd like to give a warm hey you to Ruth and Terry.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you. Kory?
All right. Well, I'm going to do my hey you to Dominic LeBlanc because, maybe it should be to the Prime Minister, but I know he isn't going to fucking listen to me or this podcast. So this might filter its way through to Dom via Dom. But hey, Dominic, you're doing.
I hear he gets
work.
Briefed on the podcast, so you can try.
Okay, we'll try.
I do not believe that.
Look. Dominic LeBlanc has done a lot of great work working with premiers. I know some of the premiers who are not with him politically do appreciate his candor and his communications, and feels like that relationship is actually really functional. So, Dom, you got to sit down the Prime Minister and convince him to get a new Environment Minister, because that guy is undoing all the good work that you're doing on a whole range of issues on a daily basis. and people are getting fucking sick of it. So if you want to have good provincial relations, it's time to find yourself a environment minister who's on the same page that you are, that Freeland's on, that the Prime Minister is on when it comes to your industrial policy, because this guy fucking isn't, and that can look at the world through a lens that is not just a narrow ideological environmental lens that's not doing your government any favors. It's not doing you any favors, not doing the Prime Minister any favors. Say goodbye to Guilbeault, and I think you'll find your life is a lot better.
You mean that Dom cannot fire enough Cuban cigars at Doug Ford to make him overlook Guilbeault?
No, not possible. Not possible.
Come on, bullshit. Couple dirty jokes in a glass.
No, that'll make him like Dom more, but it's not gonna get the Ring of Fire built, and it's not going to improve his relations with not just the province of Ontario, but others. Like, look, Guilbeault is as unpopular in their caucus and as their cabinet as he is at the Premier's table. I'll tell you that.
Scott, you got a hey you?
Yeah, I want to extend my reach of non-influence from domestic politics where no one listens to what I think or say to international politics. It's going to sound like a conservative talking point, but it is truly mind-bending that Russia can be taking over the gavel of the United Nations Security Council at a time when Putin has a warrant issued from the International Criminal Court. Like, it's just, I mean, it's just a fundamental exclamation mark.
Wait a minute, wasn't Gaddafi head of the human rights thing at one point?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, people on the right love to just bash the living shit out of the United Nations, and it's extraordinarily difficult to find a way around that criticism when something of this kind happens. How you can actually have one arm of our international institutions condemning, suggesting he's a criminal, asking for his arrest, and the UN Security Council permitting the hammer and sickle to be sitting in the chair. It's mind-boggling. There's no answer to it. There's no remedy to it, but it's just fucked. And I just wanted to say so.
Yeah, Security Council doesn't make any sense. All right, my hey you goes out to one of my increasingly favorite ministers in the cabinet, Jonathan Wilkinson. And it is because of the budget, last week's budget. When this government started, it wouldn't even mention the term nuclear. It was absolutely clear that nuclear energy had no place in this government's emissions reduction plan or its climate plan. When they first put out their green bond initiative, nuclear wasn't eligible. It was a complete ban. And I believe that he has virtually single-handedly chipped away at that inside the government and ultimately won the case so pronouncedly that all of the investment tax credits and the industrial policy around clean energy in the budget was identified as applying to nuclear and will probably, in fact, apply significantly to nuclear developments in Ontario and other provinces around the country. And since I believe, and it's not because we have a sponsor, it's I believe personally that this is a critical element to winning the battle against climate change. I'm glad to see that he had the tenacity to fight that internally and the success that he's had. So, Jonathan Wilkinson, here's to you.
I agree with that, David, but do you really think you want me with my own SMR, 3 bottles of rye into a week at the hunting camp? Like, there have to be some rules around this, right? I'll clean the filter tomorrow.
You shouldn't be trusted with anything like that, including a fire. So, all right. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN Rail. Everybody who watched and listened, hey, special shout out to the Riddell program at Carleton University for having us last week. Boy, we all had a lot of fun at that. Thanks for inviting us to be there with you. And thanks to the 3 of you for last week and for today. Great conversation. It was fun to hang out with you last week because I do miss you in person. Anyway, great show this week. Thanks for doing it. We'll see you next week. Take care of yourselves.